expecting to help fire the big guns of the 18th Airborne Corps. But once he got to Saudi Arabia, his commanders decided to put his special talents to work. Sergeant Abouada, a Jordanian by birth who was raised in Israel, is fluent in Arabic in several dialects.
I speak read and write classic and most of the dialects around here. On top of that, I speak French, speak read and write, and the North African dialect of Arabic, which is a mixture of French and Arabic.
Chronically short on people who speak Arabic, the Army shifted Abouada to a unit where he will smooth relations with local civilians and also interrogate Iraqi prisoners. But Abouada's work that's most in demand these days at this artillery base is translating newscasts for news-starved troops. So far, it has been a war in which troops, even generals, hear the latest developments on commercial radio stations. And even the troops plugged into military communication circuits turn to outside sources to hear more.
Basically, the G5 came to me and asked me to listen and interpret to Iraqi news broadcasts and any other broadcast they put out on their radio that is related to us and related to the crisis.
He listens to the Iraqi newscasts and the Saddam Hussein speeches, then passes word to his commanders on what was said. He also monitors the news from other Arab countries. Then that word is passed along to news-hungry troops. As a native of Jordan, Abouada was saddened to see war come to the Middle East.
My loyalty right now is to the United States and its army, seeing that, you know, this is my home right now. But you always got that fine thin line that you're fighting your people, and I just try to put that behind my back whenever it comes down to doing my job, and just do my job to the best of my ability and to the best benefit of the United States.
In a war where information so far has been slow to make it to the front, it turns out that language skills can be an important weapon too. Eric Engberg with U.S. forces in Saudi Arabia.
And Lynn, that is where things stand at the present.
Thank you, Bob.
Iraqi troops traded artillery fire, and there was a little fighting on the ground. They've been doing that for the past few days. These were mostly probing attacks along the Kuwaiti border. A U.S. military spokesman said 6 Iraqis were captured by an Army patrol today. 2 American soldiers were reported slightly wounded. CBS News correspondent Eric Engberg is with an Army unit moving up and to the front.
One by one, the units of the American Army are pulling out of their rear bases and moving forward to new positions where a ground war could be launched. For days now, the few available roads have been thick with U.S. convoys, all heading the same way, north. For the 3rd Battalion of the 8th Field Artillery, called the Thunderbolts, the big move began at nightfall at the desert base that has been their home for 5 months. The trip north will take an entire day. There is an impromptu send-off. A lone American soldier, one of those who will stay behind, runs the length of the entire column carrying a flag. The convoy travels all through the night, the big howitzers swinging easily behind the trucks, the barrels lit with red lights to prevent collisions. 23 hours of travel brings them to their new base. Its exact location can't be revealed for security reasons, but we can say that if this unit has to engage the Iraqis, it won't have far to go.
We're in great shape. We've got where we need to be on personnel and equipment. Ammunition is aboard. We're ready to do the job we've been asked to do.
The Thunderbolts spread out across rocky terrain that resembles more moonscape than desert. If the order to launch a ground attack comes, they know that their next move will probably be into combat. The 3rd Battalion's 155mm howitzers can throw a withering steel barrage to clear the way for infantry.
Charlie 7 white bag. Charlie 7 white bag.
But now, here at the secret assembly area, the guns and trucks are designed to look like harmless lumps on the sand. There are signs all around the newly arrived Thunderbolts that they are just one part of a massive buildup. Eric Engberg with U.S. forces in Saudi. Dan, wars change, but sergeants don't. There was a top sergeant who was speaking to the troops of an artillery unit that I spent some time with as they were preparing to move north to a position that would take them within range of the Iraqi guns. "I know you're scared," he told them, and then paused. Then with great certitude, he added, "It's good that you're scared. It means you're thinking." It is a thinking army that America has assembled in the desert. You can spend days with American troops and never hear a word of hatred or disregard for the Iraqi people. There are no ethnic slurs for the Iraqis, as have developed in other wars, no Charlie, no terms of derision. And also, there is no cocky expectation of an easy victory. In the last few days, thousands of these troops and the machines which support them have moved into new positions in the northern desert to prepare to assault Iraq and Kuwait. The convoys stretch for miles. They run round the clock. The vast movement, rivaling World War II's D-Day, has brought home the nearness of combat to the troops.
We're probably about as far forward as any Americans are right now, I would guess. And there's a certain amount of pride that comes from that more than anything else. We're ready. That's about all I can tell you. And only time will tell how ready, but we're ready.
We've been here already about 4 months already, and we'd rather go ahead and fight and try to go home the best way we can and stay here another 5 months and just sit around.
It is an army that, unique in American military experience, has had 5 months to get used to the climate and the terrain. One American general told me, when we first arrived on this desert, it seemed lonely and forbidding. Now we regard it as home. My impression was that the enlisted men do not regard it as a home. But the American troops who are massing on the border of Kuwait and Iraq know that the road home leads north, and they are preparing to go through Iraq and Kuwait to get there. Dan?
Eric, I know as part of your coverage you spent many hours in chemical protective gear. What do we make of these artillery exchanges, and are the troops fearful that Saddam will put chemical weapons in some of the artillery shells?
The one threat that you hear the American troops speak about with great trepidation is the possibility that they will be hit with chemical weapons. They have a uniquely American term for this, Dan. They talk about being slimed by Iraqi artillery shells, which means that they're not so afraid of it that they aren't prepared to use little word games in talking about it. But they also say that they're confident in the equipment that they've been issued, the gas mask, the protective suits, and that they believe that they can enter a battle in which chemical weapons are being used and survive it. Whether or not Saddam is going to use those chemical weapons against them is a subject of constant discussion amongst the troops, and they appear to be as confused about what his intentions are as the leaders in Washington are.
Combat correspondent Eric Engberg, who's been far forward with ground troops. Thanks, Eric. Jim Stewart.
High-tech weaponry in this war, smart bombs, laser-guided bombs. Eric Engberg has been out in the desert looking at the other side of the war, the human side, and Eric joins us from Dhahran. Eric, I know you've been out on a pool with the troops up at the Saudi-Iraqi border, I believe, for a whole week. Tell us what life is really like for the soldiers out there.
Well, conditions have changed remarkably, Leslie, as the troops have moved north to position themselves for the final ground assault against Kuwait. That old soft sand desert that we remember from 4 months ago has been replaced now by much more difficult terrain, hard to dig foxholes in. So hard, in fact, that sometimes they build up. Cold in the middle of the night for soldiers who often don't have heavy-duty cold weather gear and sit shivering in their foxholes. And in addition to the terrain problems and the cold temperatures, occasionally now there are sandstorms and sudden squalls and rainstorms which have turned the ground into muck and mire that can pose formidable difficulties even for four-wheel drive vehicles like this Humvee that you see moving through the terrain. So as the troops have moved north to position themselves for a possible entry into Iraq and Kuwait, the conditions are far less than pleasant.
Eric, outside of the conditions, the day-in, day-out conditions that the soldiers are facing, are the commanders telling you about any problems they're having in terms of the mission itself?
Well, I think they're very confident about their ability to face down and defeat the Iraqi army. However, you know, the kind of superiority that America has established technologically and in the air also creates some dilemmas for American commanders. And here was one. Several of them told me that they're torn between a desire to get their troops some combat experience before the big battle. That is to say, to get the troops into the rhythm of combat by engaging in some small-scale operations. But to do that, the troops would have to give up their positions. And the Americans say that they have done such a good job of concealing their units all along the border that they are hesitant to give up those secrets by having the guns actually fire. So they say they're torn between two goals here in military tactics.
Wow. That's interesting. Eric, is there any doubt in your mind that these forces are preparing for a ground assault that may come rather soon?
No, there is no doubt in my mind, and I don't think there would be in the mind of anybody who was up in the northern part of Saudi Arabia, anywhere along that lengthy border. The American trucks, tanks, and other vehicles are moving constantly up toward the north, positioning themselves for the assault. And I am talking about truck convoys that are as far as the eye can see and that run day and night. I made the comment that you could probably walk from the Saudi-Iraqi border all the way to Dhahran, which is the closest major city, walking the entire while not on the road but on the tops of American vehicles. A big move is underway, and it involves multi-divisional strength.
Okay, Eric, quickly, do you get a feeling that the troops are confident? Do you hear a lot of bravado? What sense do you get from them about this battle?
I looked for that very hard because, of course, you always worry that American troops may be overconfident. But I didn't hear any of that from these Americans. They seem to respect the ability of Saddam Hussein to cause trouble, and they're ready for it.
Okay, Eric, take care of yourself, and thank you very much. See you when you get back.
Thanks, Leslie.
Okay, Charles.
Next, 12 U.S. Marines dead in the first ground battle of the war. Allied air attacks cut Iraqi communications and supply lines. And the refugee road out of Iraq turns deadly. This is the CBS Evening News. Dan Rather reporting tonight with a special War Update edition. Good evening. While the United States and its allies claimed supremacy in the air today, Iraq struck on the ground and killed 12 U.S. Marines. They were the first Americans to die from ground action in the Gulf War. Iraqi troops and tanks unexpectedly went on the offensive, thrusting several miles into Saudi Arabia and seizing a Saudi coastal town. Saddam Hussein's forces launched the attack last night, just as President Bush was preparing to deliver his State of the Union address in Washington. Fighting went on all day today. Eric Engberg reports.
The first genuine ground battle of the war brought Marine artillery and anti-tank forces rushing to Khafji, a Saudi city near the Kuwait border. The sneak attack by the Iraqis at Khafji was one of 5 along the border that caught American and Saudi forces by surprise. 4 were turned back. 12 Marines were killed in the early hours of the fighting, the first Americans to die in ground combat in the war. At Khafji, the outcome remained in doubt as Americans launched a counterattack to surround and retake the town.
I would tell you I don't think that battle is over by a long shot. I expect a lot more fighting will probably occur tonight. And I would tell you that, you know, obviously we've been talking and we're ready for whatever comes in there tonight. But I don't think we were surprised.
The Iraqis snuck into Khafji, a largely abandoned Gulf Coast town. Several hundred men supported by tanks and armored vehicles encountering only light resistance from Saudi defenders. Marines positioned south of the city rushed forward to block any Iraqi advance down the main road south. In addition to artillery, vehicle-mounted tow missiles were aimed down the road to stop Iraqi tanks.
If I get to their enemy and I'm cleared to shoot,
Stand by.
I'll arm this missile and I'll shoot it downrange, take that bad boy out.
But at a critical point, the Marines stopped firing when word was passed that the Iraqi tanks had swung their gun turrets backward in a surrender signal.
Right now there's a slowdown in our firing due to the surrender and then also the coordination with the Saudis and other allied forces so that we don't hit friendly fire.
But that was either an Iraqi trick or mix-up. The Iraqis opened fire, beginning a pitched battle that brought U.S. tanks, artillery, and planes to push the Iraqis out of the city.
I expect we're going to go up and spank them. That's what we're going to do. And they probably ought to call 911 right now. I expect we'll go expel them rather violently, rather shortly.
A-10 Warthogs, Air Force jets built for tank killing, were sent in to help, dropping bombs and firing multi-barreled Gatling guns at Iraqi troops, totally lacking in air cover. As the U.S. control of the skies continued to play a key role in the war, at least 24 tanks were destroyed. Tonight, the roads around Khafji were choked with American tanks and armored vehicles, while Cobra gunships fired at enemy positions. American commanders dismissed the Iraqi attack as a probe, but this battle, just because it is first, is a critical test of the Americans' ability to apply such tactics as rapid maneuver and close air support against tanks that they hope will eventually beat the Iraqis on the ground. Eric Engberg, CBS News, Saudi Arabia.
The ground battle inside Saudi Arabia continues fiercely. Allied troops are trying to repel that Iraqi stab into Saudi Arabia. At least 12 U.S. Marines are known to have died so far in the battle, and the battle continues. Marine Cobra helicopters over the town of Khafji provided cover for a search and rescue mission today, a mission that sadly failed. The leader of the rescue patrol brought back a poignant eyewitness account.
Apparently 2 soldiers made a wrong turn coming this way and got themselves up into Khafji. On our trip up there, it appeared that one vehicle crashed into a wall. The 2 soldiers that were in that vehicle, we could not find them. The vehicle was there, the doors were open, their individual equipment was there. Their weapons were gone, but we saw no blood stains or no sign of them.
It's got to be disappointing not to be able to find those men.
Yeah, it's, we wanted to get them pretty bad.
It is well over 1 day now since the Iraqis attacked in the cold desert night and under a full moon. In that first ground action of Operation Desert Storm inside Saudi Arabia, the ground action is still going on, so we want to go to correspondent Eric Engberg, standing by with the latest. Eric?
Dan, the reports are still fragmentary and incomplete, but it appears at this hour that a major battle is underway for control of Khafji, pitting attacking U.S. Marines and Saudi Arabian forces against the Iranians. The U.S. Marines moved up heavy reinforcements, including many tanks, late in the day after the Iraqi forces seized control of the city. Now, late reports from the Associated Press indicate that an attack has been made at the center of Khafji, led by Saudi troops, and that Marine Corps units were rocketed by rocket-propelled grenades and perhaps artillery and were forced to beat a retreat. The result remains in doubt at this hour, Dan.
Eric Engberg, were the Allies surprised by this?
Very much so. There were Saudi units patrolling the streets of Khafji, and it appears that a daylight attack without any kind of air cover by the Iraqis took them by complete surprise.
Eric Engberg. The Battle of Khafji goes into its second.
From CBS News, this is America Tonight, with Charles Carrault in New York and Leslie Stahl in Washington.
Good evening. A long Iraqi convoy moving south toward Saudi Arabia tonight is under heavy attack. B-52 bombers are pounding the convoy, made up of as many as 1,000 Iraqi tanks and other vehicles. Also tonight, the search continues for a missing transport plane shot down over Kuwait with 14 Americans on board. And tonight, Allied soldiers are mopping up by moonlight in the Saudi town of Khafji, where the first ground battle took place. It took the Allies 2 tries to regain control of the town. They were ambushed last night by the Iraqis and driven back. But early this morning, they headed back into Khafji, driving the Iraqis north. There were casualties on both sides. The commander of Allied forces, General Norman Schwarzkopf, downplayed the importance of that battle, saying it was as significant as a mosquito on an elephant. There were an estimated 200 Iraqi casualties. West of Khafji, 11 Marines died and 2 others were wounded in a separate action. A short time ago, a Saudi general announced that his forces had taken over 350 Iraqi prisoners.
Khafji is all clear. Now we are controlling it, and we have everything as it was before.
The Battle of Khafji revealed several things. The fighting ability of the soldiers from Qatar and Saudi Arabia, which was considerable, the capacity of the Iraqis for ambush and surprise, and the devotion of the United States Marines for one another. Two Associated Press reporters saw all three of those things when they accompanied a column of Saudi armored personnel carriers trying to retake Khafji last night. John King and Fred Bayless told their story to our Eric Engberg today.
And then right about 11 o'clock, they all started moving forward. They were spaced out at first, probably 8-10 feet between them. But some crossed in, got actually into the center of the city proper, and the rest of them were just south, and they got really crunched together because they were catching up to each other. And it's once they got crunched, and say you had 50 of them in a football field length territory, that's when the Iraqis just opened fire from the north, from the northwest. And there was some machine gun fire from the east. That was more harassment fire because, you know, they're armored vehicles.
It sounds like a well-laid ambush.
They were obviously ready, and it seemed that they knew what they were doing because they waited till they got bunched up.
I wouldn't know how to set an ambush, but it seemed to me that it was a pretty well set ambush.
Everyone said get out. Retrograde is the word they were using when they, in radio conversations, said the Saudis were retrograding, that they were retrograding because they were coming under fire. Went back, like I said, about 6-8 miles. About a 15-minute break, and then the Marines were the first to go forward because they had left guys out there.
The Marines moved forward again, maybe to about a kilometer, half a kilometer from their original position, and the Qataris and the Saudis kept on flying into the town, firing and taking fire.
The Iraqis who occupied the city did not know that they had company. Marine forward observers were holed up in the city all night, hiding out, while they kept doing what they went there to do.
They were calling in the artillery. They would call back and say, fire the artillery here. Like this morning, at one point this morning, they called in artillery, said they had 17 to 20 Iraqi armored vehicles in a position. They called in the artillery, and then it was a hit, so they called the repeat on the same spot. For security reasons, we didn't mention that they were in there last night, because if the Iraqis saw the reports, they would have known there were Marines in the city.
Did the Marines get their guys?
Yeah, they got everybody out. I mean, they didn't get the recon guys out until this morning. They got their guys out, and the guys who were in the desert, they pulled back in the middle of the night.
The thing that struck me was that most of these guys, this was their first combat, and just how poised and in control they were. And in fact, there's a captain, I said, how much combat have you been in? And he said, well, that much now.